Welcome. My name is Dimitri Books. I am a managing consultant at Euroconsult. Thank you for joining us today for this new webinar in the GSOA webinar series in association with Connectivity Business News, focused on satellite and how it is a key part of the equation to bridge the digital divide. The COVID-19 pandemic is now in the rearview mirror, but it's clearly demonstrated the key role that internet access plays in our everyday lives. This is true in several areas, including education, remote working, public service delivery, and financial service, among others. The pandemic has increased the cost of being offline with connectivity more than ever, a lifeline for working, learning, networking, and accessing essential services. The pandemic accelerated the uptake of broadband and the adoption of digital services by individuals, with evidence suggesting this will be sustained in coming years, leading to the increasing importance of having access to quality broadband networks and not just basic connectivity in the future. In recent years, significant progress have been observed when it comes to connecting people. So in 2022, an estimated 5.3 billion people, which is around 2/3 of the global population, used the internet, a number that has doubled in the past 8 years alone. Universal access may not be a distant prospect in mature markets, where today more than 90% of the population uses the internet, but the situation is very different elsewhere. Despite the significant progress observed recently, 2.6 billion people remain unconnected today, with Asia Pacific and Sub-Saharan Africa the two regions with most unconnected people. So they account combined around 85% of the world total. In emerging markets, where most unconnected people remain, two of the biggest barriers to internet adoption remain cost. And by this, I mean affordability of internet services and devices, and as well digital skills, such as the ability to use digital devices and communication applications. So affordability of broadband services improved a bit in 2023, but the global gap between emerging countries and the most advanced markets remains wide today. In coming years, strategies and policies to enable further broadband adoption and accelerate digital inclusion will be for sure key to transition to a more connected world and to be in a position where bridging the digital divide becomes a possibility. So the World Radio Communication Conference, or WRC 23, is taking place right now at a time of rapid growth and innovation in the satellite communication sector, following substantial investments in satellite infrastructure in recent years. Outcomes from WRC 23 will have a significant impact in connecting the 2.6 billion people that are still not online today. With the arrival of next generation satellites and constellations, satellite will have a key role to play to help reduce the digital divide. Satellites should increasingly be able to compete with terrestrial services in rural areas with the rollout of these new satellites, and they will contribute to the availability of better packages for end users, as well as, and this is very important, the increasing affordability of entry-level services. So in today's webinar, we will discuss with the panelists why satellite is a key part of the equation to bridge the digital divide in the future. So following this short overview, let me now introduce today's panelists. So we have 4 panelists that will provide us their views on the topic today. First, let me introduce you Isabel Morrow, the Director General at GSOA. We also have with us today Toby Robinson, Chief of Strategy and Business Development at Avanti. We have Alex Wong, Senior Advisor, Strategic Engagement and Initiatives Executive Office at ITU, and Jorge Rodriguez, so Head of the Product Management and Pre-Sales at Hispasat. So before I ask my first question, I would like all panelists to introduce themselves as well as how their company is involved in connecting the unconnected. So maybe Isabel, I'll let you start.
Sure, and thank you, Dimitri, and good evening from here in Dubai to all of you. Into GSOA, we are the global trade industry, representing the satellite industry, the whole ecosystem. So for us, of course, connectivity is really trying, to bring connectivity everywhere, in particular in areas where terrestrial sort of coverage is not available. So this is our role. And as you know, we're going through tremendous innovation and growth at the moment. And so we think that satellite is going to play, is already playing, but is going to play really an increasing role in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Toby?
Thanks, Dimitri. Well, Avanti is a global multi-orbit provider of connectivity services and solutions. But we're particularly strong in sub-Saharan Africa And bringing connectivity to unconnected communities is really a key part of our mission. As we'll come on to probably describe in more detail later on in the webinar, we've got success in over the last few years connecting hundreds of villages in sub-Saharan Africa and bringing connectivity to those communities.
Thank you. Alex?
Hello, Dimitri. Hello, everyone. So my name is Alex Wong with the International Telecommunication Union, so the ITU. We're part of the UN. We're the UN's agency. We call ourselves the UN's specialized agency on anything digital. And we've been around since 1856, when I guess the telegraph first started. And so we play a overall regulatory role in anything tied to ICTs and in particular communications. And of course, satellites, which is one of the topics at the WRC. And our other main focus, or our core focus, is also to make sure that we connect the world and make sure that everyone is meaningfully connected.
Thank you, Alex. Jorge?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Dimitri. I'm Jorge Rodriguez. I'm working Hispasat. Hispasat, as you probably know, is a satellite operator and service provider with a strong presence in the EMEA regions and Americas. And we have been working in the digital divide solution since long time ago, especially in Americas, where we are deploying different initiatives to connect the unconnected, that I will tell you afterwards, of course.
Thank you for the introductions, everyone. So let me now ask you my first question. So in recent years, significant progress has been observed, right, when it comes to connecting people. As I highlighted earlier, 2.6 billion people are still not online today. So what types of strategies and policies are needed to enable further broadband adoption and accelerate digital inclusion to transition to a more connected world and to be in a position where bridging the digital divide becomes potentially a reality? So I would like maybe all of you to give us your view on the topic. Who would like to start? So.
Yes, I can start. So from our perspective, to bridge the digital divide, we need a strong collaboration between the public and private sector. This partnership could allow to deploy these solutions in an efficient way. I will give you an example. In Spain, there is a collaboration between the public sector and the private sector in a project called Único Rural. This is an initiative launched by the Spanish administration in order to subsidize the satellite connectivity and then user terminal to provide affordable connectivity service to 100% of the population with 100 megabit per second. In this model, Hispasat is the neutral wholesale operator, and different service providers can offer satellite packages to an affordable price that is 35 euros per month of 100 megabit per second. And the terminal is fully subsidized also by the administration. So in this kind of initiatives, this kind of collaboration with the public sector and the private sector is really key. But we have to be honest, Dimitri, also, because some of these initiatives cannot easily export to developing countries. In developing countries where we see higher bridge between the connected and the unconnected areas, we need more powerful tools from the administration, from the public sector, and probably change the scope in terms of what is the target. In this case, we are promoting, we focus in the digital transformation for basic services. So we are not purely focusing connecting homes, but transforming education, health, agriculture, and other businesses in these rural areas in these developing countries where we are working on. So this is more or less how we think that we should work with different perspectives with developing countries and developed countries.
Thank you. Would someone else want to comment?
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in. But I think there are many, several areas that we need to look at when we look at strategies and policies. One is, if you look at the pandemic, we all realized during that time that without connectivity, we could not access healthcare, education, financial services, or simply, having the ability to work. And I think that's one area where collaboration amongst ministries and amongst cross-industry and cross-ministries is really essential, because we might be the industry, whether it's the satellite or the mobile side, that brings the connectivity, but we need to work hand in hand with healthcare and with financial services to find solutions, as digital transformation is accelerating as well. So I think that's one of the areas, and I know there are ITU is working on that. UNDPA is working on, there are UN agencies that are really trying to bring all these industries together. The other thing is as well the regional. There is not one size fits all. And I think whilst, we all have a global aim of connecting or bringing online 2.6 billion people, we have to look at numbers. For instance, in the Americas, 22% of the rural population is not covered by any terrestrial mobile signal at all. And you have an additional 5% that only have access to 2G networks. So that means that the Americas have 27% of the population that does not access to the internet. And that, when I say that, it also means the US. It's not just, looking at Latin America. This number goes up to 29% in Africa. So I think it's really important that we also look at regional strategies, because each region has various specificities, specific markets, and that is really something to keep in mind. The other thing as well is, given the fast-paced development of industry, and, at the moment in particular of the satellite industry, for us, it's really important as well that all decisions from policymakers are really informed by a future-looking strategy. It's not just about the moment. It's really, you really need to think, where do we want our digital broadband strategy as a country to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and really need to look at that long-term strategy. And eventually, the final one for me is really to try and see that, the optimum solution is really lying in using the right mix of technologies. If the mobile industry had the solution, the whole planet would already be connected. If we had the solution, the whole planet would be connected. So I think it's really upon us to pulling the strengths of the different technology to reduce the cost and collectively really deliver on this common goal that we have, if you want, of greater access for a much larger number of users around the globe.
Thank you, Isabel. Toby, Alex?
Yeah. No, I agree with everything that Isabella said and Jorge. It's interesting. So in Africa, so on your helpful charts, if you think Africa's about a third of the unconnected people left, some 700 or 800 million. So it is primarily around cost. If you think the average household income in sub-Saharan Africa is $50 a month. So, that's not going to buy a satellite subscription. That's going on, real basics, food and healthcare and clothing. So there will be community solutions. And, sadly, there are still regulatory barriers in some countries that get in the way of those things. I think what's been very impressive about satellite over the last 10 years or so, I think there's been a really rapid transition from quite a niche, expensive technology that was somewhere between sort of the plaything of the rich or the connectivity of last resort to really a mainstream connectivity. In many ways now, it sits alongside fiber and cellular as just another means of another form of telecoms connectivity. But I think in some countries and regions, I think the regulators still sort of see it as an expensive thing that can be taxed rather than as a thing that can really be enabled and accelerated to bring connectivity. So there are definitely still policy and regulatory barriers that need to be addressed as part of the solution.
Thank you, Toby. Alex?
Great. Well, I mean, I get to go last, so maybe I'll just build on the collaboration and partnerships. Maybe that's the area that we're also spending a lot of time at the ITU on. I'm sure we have a fairly educated audience here listening, but when we talk about meaningful connectivity, and it's all been covered in the previous speakers, there's a combination of what we call the supply side issues and the demand side. And on the supply side, It's the access itself, the infrastructure that gives the access, which of course satellites play a key role, and then the affordability, which Toby elaborated on. And I just wanted to add on affordability. Indeed, in Africa, according to our statistics, only 11 countries in Africa have affordability targets below the 2% of your gross national income. That's the threshold that we say that if it's below that, then your connectivity is affordable. Only 11 countries have average costs for connectivity below that. So the affordability is a huge issue. And then on the demand side, we have the user who won't use the internet or use the connectivity. They don't actually understand how to use it, skills, and if they don't have the content, the relevant content. And that doesn't mean watching a TikTok video. It means, you're a farmer and you want to be able to get a pricing of a commodity. So those four sort of pillars of supply and demand really require the partnership and collaboration that everyone has talked about, because no one person, no one actor can do all four. So I'll just take a little moment to talk about, what can we do and what is the UN doing? At the UN, we think one of our biggest strengths is to be that impartial convener. And Isabel joined our Partner to Connect annual meeting that we held 2 days ago to announce another JSOA pledge. So JSOA has made 10 pledges. And what we've done is we've created a platform to let every organization, business, government, civil society, academic, make a pledge on what you're doing to connectivity. Because what's really fun is the matchmaking, because you'll have a potential satellite provider who's making a pledge to provide connectivity, and then you have a country, and we have a lot of countries who've made pledges who are wanting satellite connectivity. And then we have a university. I was looking at the pledges. Kyoto University in Japan has made a pledge about a app that they've created or software to help with disaster detection that would be used on satellites. So you've now got this kind of mixture of people doing different things that are collectively going to achieve all the areas that we need to close the 2.6 billion that are not connected.
Thank you, Alex. So then moving to my next question. So you mentioned collaborations, right? So here I would like to focus on public-private collaboration. So governments and policymakers can play an essential role, right, in addressing the digital divide. In recent years, governments around the world have been central in helping reduce the digital divide, but I think they cannot do it alone, right? So the private sector as well plays a key role in the equation. So according to you, how important is the private sector in helping bridge the digital divide, and how important are public-private partnerships to ensure that all, so I think 8+ billion people today can be connected in the future? Maybe Isabel or Jorge, would you like to answer the question?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in. I think, look, it's it comes from both sides, right? We cannot do it. The government alone cannot do it. Cannot achieve the connection of universal or meaningful connectivity, and neither can we. Just as an industry. So I think collaboration is key, but the contribution of the private sector is really key, because at the end of the day, we're probably the ones who are bringing in the investment. So again, whilst we need the collaboration is probably as well where we need policy frameworks, regulatory frameworks that are really conducive to foster that investment, to foster that innovation and growth. And being here at WRC for 4 weeks, we've had interaction with regulators for around the world and ministers for the last 4 weeks. It is the aim of every country, every nation, to connect everybody in the country. So it is really incumbent on us to work with with governments and find these partnerships that are going to be conducive to those models. I think one of the things that is important, and two things actually that I want to mention. One is really that when we sit at a table with governments and discuss, it has to be understood that the industry is not going to do I don't know what the word is. It's not philanthropy. Industry goes in a country with a business case. And so it's a matter of sitting at the table and trying to find really how are we going to reconcile the objective of a private enterprise and the overall arching goal of a country of connecting, their whole nation, their policy, So I think that is really critical. And of course, that's the thing that is very difficult to come at, at a common understanding. But it's feasible. Then it's also, and I know Alex and ITU and others, World Bank have worked a lot on this, is finding the financial models that are going to help this. So we need to find models that are going to be economically viable for industry, because otherwise, if they're going to lose money, they're not going to invest, in such services. So I think that is critical. The second thing is the red tape. And Alex at the time and I were, well, Alex, I don't know if you were still at the World Economic Forum, but during the pandemic, I was at the World Economic Forum. We came together with GSMA, GSOA, ITU, and World Bank, and we did an action plan. And really, it was done within 2 weeks of the pandemic, breaking out. And it was really a sort of an action, a call for action on governments to, if you want, to temporarily suspend the red tapes and areas such as, technology neutrality and spectrum measures in order to really accelerate, connectivity in the country. And it really worked. So those are things as well that we need to look at. Sometimes I'm not saying we don't need regulation. We need, of course, there needs to be a policy framework. But where there is excessive red tape, that's an area where we should be looking as well. And finally, the last thing is we need to keep connectivity as a top priority for governments. This was the case during the pandemic. Unfortunately, since then, there've been wars, there've been booming inflation, and that has fallen back again as not a priority, and it needs to be kept as a priority on the list of governments.
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, only to add. So more or less, I have introduced some examples of these public-private partnerships in the first response. So only to remark that we need to build these economical viable business models, and especially in these areas where emerging markets, where there is very difficult because of this concept of affordability. The role of the private sector is this: provide the solution, the infrastructure as we have, but we cannot say that, or it's difficult to think that these initiatives can be done only from the private sector. This is something that we have done or we have tested in several projects and pilots in Latin America, trying to develop sustainable business models only with private sector, and the results were not very positive. So we need the involvement of these public administrations when the affordability issue is there. And only to add that in our perspective, we need to talk or to move to talk not only about connectivity, but about digital transformation. This is real relevant. We have done several projects not only providing connectivity to the schools, public places. After 2-3 years, they switch off the connectivity and nothing was there. And in the way around, we have shown several projects where the public authorities buy laptops, different devices, and connectivity was not there, or even with connectivity, there are not the tools to improve the skills of this population. So we need to start to talk more about these transversal projects that include all the tools, not only connectivity, to really impact in these populations. This is, I think, one of the main challenges for the coming years, for our industry in general and for the unconnected areas in particular. Yeah.
Thank you. Toby, Alex, you want to add something? Or...
I'll just mention briefly, the policy regulation dimension, of course, we know is critical for promoting the investment and the private sector engagement. So I'll just mention the frameworks and the tools ITU has made. And one of those occasions where we actually ranked governments, we have something called the G5 framework. It's a collaborative regulation framework. It actually measures how, I'll use the term fit for purpose, the regulatory framework of a country is in terms of promoting a healthy ICT digital environment. So things like agile regulatory approaches, independent regulators, all the things that are associated with what makes for a healthy environment. We actually put a framework together to measure those. and we actually rank or we tell countries where they are on that. So that's a really nice way to also frame or give guidance on what are some of the policy regulatory changes that a country needs.
Thanks. So before I move to my next question, a general reminder that the audience can pose questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of their screen. So for my next question, I would like to focus on the World Radio Communication Conference, so WRC 23. So the conference is taking place at a time of rapid growth and a lot of changes in the satellite industry overall. So with the expected rise in demand for satellite services in coming years, why do you think ensuring adequate spectrum for satellite-based services is key? And also, could you give us your views on key issues discussed at WRC 23 and the potential impact for satellite and the universal broadband access overall? So maybe Alex, as I know you followed the conference closely, if you want to answer the question.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, I'll have Isabel's on the ground, so she'll have the real scoop. But maybe again, just to explain what the World Radio Conference is, it happens every 4 years. It's a regulatory setting conference, so it's a 4-week conference because there's a lot of negotiation going on, and the ITU's role is because by mandate, by resolution, by the member states, we play a role in the regulation of spectrum, and also in general, it could be land use spectrum or space-based spectrum, and also we play a role in assigning satellite orbit slots, which many of you on the panel have been involved with. What, of course, is new is the low Earth orbit satellites, which now launch constellations of satellites. And we're also responsible for sort of managing or coordinating, I think, how the constellation works. That's one of the items for discussion on what is the ITU's role with LEOs. And why is this so important for spectrum? It's because for those of you that understand how the physics will work, is that you have the low Earth orbit satellites at a lower altitude, and you have the high Earth orbit or the geostationary satellites above, and so by default there's going to be interference potentially, and so the ITU has a role to play to try to ensure that the spectrum is preserved and that there's minimal interference. So for the WRC, I think that there's a few issues that are being discussed that are relevant to the satellite industry. One of them is tied to how satellite earth stations on ships and planes should be affected or to be regulated. What are the international regulatory provisions on the use of these fixed satellite terminals from aircrafts and vessels? And again, that sort of ties to the spectrum usage and interference issues. So that's one item that's being discussed. And the second that I'm aware of that is also taking up some time is the actual coordination of satellite procedures and processes and how it's recorded. So that's also the deployment of the non-geostationary satellites, these constellations. How will that work? So, is that going to be heavily regulated or more lightly regulated? Anyhow, that's my view from Geneva. I'll let Isabel from the ground, who might be in those discussions, give an update on that or correct anything I might have oversimplified.
Yeah, no, thanks Alex. And we actually the conference wrapped up, I think, this afternoon. So now it's just like drafting and they'll sign tomorrow. I think an overall observation, and bear in mind this was my first WRC, so I'm still kind of under shock after 4 weeks. Like it's really treaty negotiations. It's very heavy country negotiations between member states. So very interesting. I think the one observation that everybody has done and has made of this conference is that overall you would have normally 50%, 50-50 IMT, what would we call here IMT, which is mobile issues, and 50% satellite. This has shifted to 70% of the discussions and the what they call the agenda items, the topics being discussed are around satellite. And I think that alone really says a lot about where the market is, where the whole ecosystem for satellite is, where the opportunities are. It's been particularly heated because there were a lot of discussions around NGSOs, the non-geostationary and the geostationaries. We sit in the middle. We represent all spectrum of the industry. So for us, a good result is to have a result where everybody is, as you know, is enabled, if you want, where the regulations that come out enable everybody to operate, you know, in a safe and balanced way, if you want. So, you know, that is, I think it will be very interesting to see a lot of the what is called the agenda items that are going into WRC 27. So a lot of studies that will be done. Again, 70% will be around satellites. So it will be very interesting to see what, you know, what these discussions will be. It will be around some aggregate interference, you know, limits as well that you can calculate. You know, a lot of areas that until 4 years ago, at least, were not necessarily such heated discussions. But one of the things as well not to forget is that for us as a satellite industry, one of the main goals as well was to safeguard you know, the spectrum that we have for critical services that we already deliver. So, you know, it's all good. There are the NGSOs, but there are also GEOs and others that are already delivering services. And so all these bands that we have, you know, in the KU, K8, that is really to protect these bands. And, you know, there was a strong push to identify spectrum, and, you know, it might not mean much to anybody, but between the 10 and 15 gigahertz band. And that was something that we fought really hard to keep, because otherwise, you know, it would really sort of endanger the services that we are currently providing. So I think that was a good outcome for us, that those bands will not be studied for future identification of IMT, in particular at the time where, as we see, the sector is growing so much that it's not just about safeguarding the spectrum that we have, but it's ensuring that the additional allocations that we need for services such as IoT, low frequency, are going to be available for all this innovation that is that is coming and that is booming actually in our sector.
Thank you, Isabel. So it's as well a good transition for the first question of the audience. So let me ask you this first question. So from Monica Ermert, so how do the decisions with regard to NGSO and GSO at WRC 23 help connecting the unconnected? Or would have hoped for more frequency allocation, so general and direct to device, or for example, as well, less red tape, so EPFD? Who would like to answer this question?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and you know, I'm going to give a very tamed and balanced answer, just for the fact that I just mentioned that we represent both sides. And for anybody who was here on the ground, you will have seen that some side of the industry was maybe in favor of you know, one way forward and others another one. And for us, I think we've arrived at the balanced way as a result. We will see. I think the next 4 years are going to be really critical in what we see, and, you know, the studies, what will come out of studies in the next cycle, and see where, you know, where this sort of balance between NGSOs and GSOs is going to bring us. So I'm afraid that as the association, you know, I all I can say is that for us the result is okay to have a good balanced result that can suit all our membership.
Would someone else want to comment? Okay, so then another audience question from Brad Grady. So how can the satellite industry compete in countries where legislation favors fiber or other terrestrial solutions?
So maybe I might be able to just give an impression on that, because I come from the mobile industry. I was in the mobile industry for 15 years. And one of the comments, and it's a bit brutal, but I think it's true, is that, you know, licenses and spectrum, mobile spectrum, can bring a lot of revenues in countries, you know, because you have auctions, you have systems that can bring a lot of revenues. And I think that is something that in many cases, you know, can also sort of shift the way some governments are thinking. But I think we have to think in the long term. And one of the things is also because mobile operators, if you want, have the end user themselves, which is not always the case with satellite. You know, you have B2C, but you have a lot of B2B. And so the end customer, you know, is not going to be the one when you say like the ARPU or the taxes that are paid. It's going to be maybe via the mobile operator again, whilst in fact it is also the satellite operator that is paying taxes at the other end. So I think there is always a misperception as well of like the mobile industry bringing, if you want, more revenues tax-wise to the governments, whether it's for spectrum or tax, normal taxation on services.
Yeah, if you let me also respond, Dimitri, from the I would say commercial side of the perspective that I have in the field, we need to show that we are crucial and we are important and we can impact these lives. This is the best way to convince policymakers to consider satellites. So we have seen in Europe, for example, a lot of initiatives from the public sector to boost the deployment of fiber, but at the end they realize that they need satellite for achieving the goal of the Agenda 2025 of 100 megabit per second, for example. So we are seeing the same in our case in the other side of the Atlantic. We have seen a lot of initiatives to deploy fiber, to deploy 4G, for 3G. That of course is needed, is a requirement, it is real, but of course we need also some policies and initiatives for the people, for the territories where the terrestrial infrastructure is not there. And my understanding, now also with this boom of the new constellations, is that there is a real perspective from the administrations and all the private sector that satellite is there, and they can use it and they will use it. This is definitely, I think, one of the change that I seen during the last years.
No, I think it's very clear. I guess it's the whole premise of this webinar, isn't it? That satellite will be a critical element in connecting the last 2.5 billion people. And I think now the costs are at a level where satellite can make a huge contribution to that in an economic way. But in terms of the question, but it has to be a level playing field. And I think people have touched on it, but I think in some countries there are expensive licenses. There are licenses that are very slow to get. There are additional taxes, and I think different countries are on different places in the spectrum. But I think it is the regulators shifting from seeing that the way they maximize value for the countries to tax the satellite industry, rather than actually the way they maximize value for the country is to facilitate the rapid rollout of satellite, which then brings the economic benefits from connectivity.
Alex, you want to add something? Or
Nothing from me on that one. Thanks.
great, thanks.
I think just to add what Jorge said, that we really do have a big role to play as the satellite industry in maybe showing more visibility of what we actually do behind the scene. That is not necessarily, a lot of the connectivity that arrives in the handset of a person is done because of satellite, but you cannot see it. And so I think that's why there is also this perception that, maybe satellite does less than what we think it does. And I think with all the new services that are coming up, direct to device and others, this is going to be really, we are going to be really more at the forefront, I think, of the user, itself.
Great, thank you. So then moving to my next question for the satellite operators. So as you know, 3 satellite solutions are used to address the universal broadband access market. So the first one is community Wi-Fi hotspots that are typically located in areas with low population densities. The second one is consumer-grade broadband, so also referred to as residential broadband. And the third and last one is cellular backhaul. So which of these solutions do you believe is the most adapted to reduce the digital divide, well, especially focusing on emerging markets? And can you maybe highlight a few examples of projects that have been successful in connecting people by satellite using some of those solutions? So Toby or Jorge, if you could.
Then let me kick off. I think if you look at that last 2.5 billion, and I know Africa very well, and I'm guessing that they are similar issues in Asia, rural is really the big challenge. So you typically have lower income people spread out over a larger area. So basically, both physically with traditional terrestrial technologies, they're harder to connect, and then they have less money to spend on the service, and you're trying to balance both of those things. So because of the income levels, I mean, individual people and household buying packages is absolutely not the way ahead, because just they can't afford it. So I think it is community-based solutions. And as I mentioned earlier, in northern Nigeria now, which is a very marginalized low-income area, we've been working with a mobile operator and a tower company over the last couple of years to connect 600 communities so far. So in a sense, this is a hybrid terrestrial satellite model. So as Isabel was saying, from the user's point of view, they're just using their normal phone, but it just happens when it's connecting to the micro BTS, it's then being backhauled over satellite rather than backhauled over microwave or fiber. And we're finding that's a very effective model. We've got some great videos of when the communities get connected, all the people gathering and watching, and then the looks of joy on their faces when their phones work. And while it's early days, we have some initial data to suggest that actually it's then accelerating the growth of those communities, because if people are choosing where to live, they'll go and live in a community where there is connectivity rather than where there's no connectivity. And I think community Wi-Fi is not so different, because ultimately, again, it will have to be, for these rural communities, satellite backhaul. In a sense, it's almost whether the sort of the tower to device connectivity is Wi-Fi or is 2G, 3G, 4G. So I think practice will see both of those, but it's all about the satellite backhaul that's linking the signal back to the core network and the internet ultimately. And just the final thing to say is that those projects I mentioned are not subsidized. So I think in some areas there will need to be subsidies, but actually with the technology and the technical commercial models now, we can bring connectivity to millions, tens of millions more people with commercial models, and that has to be one of the priorities moving ahead, is to roll those out.
Yeah, so if I will add, Dimitri, I am from the northwest of Spain, and we are well known in Galicia is the place where I'm coming from. For these kind of questions, we always respond, it depends. So in that case, I think it depends. So after we mentioned community Wi-Fi hotspots, for example, is the easiest way and usually the cheapest way to provide a minimum connectivity service to these rural populations. So most of the public programs are based on this kind of architecture that reduce costs compared to others. However, usually the coverage is a little bit limited to 13 public area, 100 meters, 200 meters. Of course, you can install two, or three, but in general, the coverage is more limited. And on the other hand, the monetization option for the private sector is really very low or limited. Maybe in Africa, there are a couple of projects where there is a monetization of this Wi-Fi, but our experience in Latin America is very bad, I would say, in terms of monetization of the Wi-Fi. So most of the programs are public programs to deploy these free Wi-Fi areas in schools, public squares, libraries, etc. So we have participated in several projects like this in Mexico, Brazil, currently in Colombia, Morocco, among others. So there are a lot of initiatives, and we think that there is a very good way to deploy a minimum Wi-Fi connectivity rapidly. But of course, the quality of service is not fully guaranteed in most of the cases, because the Wi-Fi architecture usually have some limitations on that, and the number of users are not usually controlled. On the other side, we have consumer broadband, that this is probably the best way in terms of performance. It provides high-speed connectivity services for an end user or home. It also is more expensive. So as Toby mentioned, maybe in our markets, emerging markets, it's really difficult to bridge the digital divide with this kind of solutions. The capacity of the user for pay for a package and the terminal is really low. But in other regions, as I mentioned in the beginning, in Spain, we are doing consumer broadband for these homes that has not fiber right now and will not have fiber for 2025. So this is a good solution in that kind of countries. We know also some initiatives in US, Canada, among others, and several countries of Europe. In the other hand, we have also cellular technology. And this is quite interesting because obviously it's more capex intensive than Wi-Fi hotspot, but allow wider coverage areas. And obviously the development of these cellular networks in rural areas is more challenging. Not only we are always thinking in the technical part of the geographies of these areas, but also in the capacity of the MNOs to deploy business models and monetization again. So usually the cellular backhaul projects require certain collaboration with the public authorities, and we have seen interesting projects in Mexico, for example, during the last year. The CFE, that is a public company, is deploying sites, 4G sites, as a neutral mobile operator, that most of them are fed by satellite. So this is a kind of success case of these cellular solutions for connecting the connected. And there are several other initiatives. Even the MNOs are deploying now more and more 4G, 3G sites in these rural areas with a sustainable business model that is linked to the reduction in the price that we are from the satellite industry providing during the last years with the new high throughput satellites, very high throughput satellites, constellations, etc., etc. So I think it is a mix of these technologies, and some of them are more suitable for a certain use case. But let me remind you that this is the first step, connectivity. Last week, for example, we launched a project in Dominican Republic to start the deployment of connectivity for schools, but we went more beyond that. We are now deploying this community Wi-Fi teleeducation solution with a server, with content that is coming from the Ministry of Education. Also, all the devices, laptops, tablets, etc., and a complete training program, not only for the teacher, but also for all the community for these new technologies and the digital content. So connectivity with different tools, and beyond of that, we have to build services and solutions that use this connectivity.
Thank you. So moving then to the next audience question. So from Shilpa Chuduri, who is asking, how do you see the new satellite systems like LEO close digital divide in overall globally, keeping in mind cost factors? So rural outreach while even making business work against fiber and terrestrial services.
Yeah, shall I start on that? I mean, I think what's been transformational over the last 10 years is just unit costs have really come down a long way in satellite, and there are many things that have been driving that. So there was the frequency shift from C-band and KU band up to KA band, which is a bit like in mobile, almost, going from 900 megahertz to 1800 or 2100. So you could put a lot more data through it a lot more quickly at lower cost. I think Jorge mentioned the shift to high throughput satellites. And then really these NGSO satellites is just the next evolution of that trend. And I think what's very exciting in terms of bridging the digital divide is there is going to be a lot of capacity out there, and inevitably supply and demand will drive those prices down. So absolutely, LEO in particular and MEO has a key role to play in rural connectivity. But as just GEO, I think all unit capacity prices will come down. But that certainly opens up more possibilities, and both I think will allow for more unsubsidized models, but also will reduce the level of subsidy required in other areas. And that's absolutely, I think, one of the keys that unlocks the store over the next 10 years. So I think we're probably sitting here today, and connecting everyone is, I think, a genuine reality now in terms of what can be done that probably sitting here 10 years ago, it might have been more of a theoretical discussion, and that's very exciting.
Thank you.
I'll add a comment on this, Dimitri. I mean, maybe just referring, I mean, what's the best technology choice? Of course, that's a combination of all the issues, the costs, etc. But maybe just to remind that ITU published guidelines that defined speed or data capacity that defines meaningful connectivity, and we said it should be minimum 10 megabyte per second connectivity. And then for schools, we said 20 megabyte per second capacity, and that allows what we are defining as meaningful connectivity, so that somebody can actually interact and just have some basic usage. And so I think all the different options that provide solutions could be feasible, especially with all the advancement in the technology. But I think the cost is going to be the key issue.
Thank you. So moving to the next audience question. So from Hussein Bokhari, how can developing nations and governments create favorable policies beyond subsidizing for foreign operators or operators overall, right, to work with mobile operators in the countries? And can developed nations support this?
I can have a quick stab at that. Like, well, I think the first rule is that if you want to attract in a country a foreign company, like there must be no discrimination against, in regulatory, or you must be able to operate in the same way that a national operator can operate. And then look at whether there might be partnerships that may be happening where you take the capacity of maybe the broader global operator with the needs of the local one. But I think a level playing field is the rule number one to allow a global player to enter the market, and that is not the case everywhere. So I think that would be, for me at least, the number one rule that can create that sort of environment.
Does someone else want to comment on the question? Good. So let me then go to my next question. So focus more on the direct-to-device market. So I'd like to open the discussion on this topic, as we believe that there is for satellite real possibility to further expand its addressable market in coming years with direct-to-device. The D2D satellite service landscape is gaining momentum, supported by new regulation, for example, FCC rulemaking, and the development of new 5G standards through 3GPP to more seamlessly integrate satellite into terrestrial networks. So the addressable market for D2D services could span to potentially the billions of subscribers within several years, right? So what's your view on this market? And do you think it could contribute to bridging the digital divide, or at least helping bridge it in coming years? Toby, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah. So I think direct device, direct handset is a really, really exciting development in the industry. And there's obviously a lot of clever people working on it, a lot of money going into it. It's obviously still quite an embryonic technology. Some very successful tests have been done, but, literally the test is we sent a text message, or, we made one phone call when the satellite was at exactly the right place in the sky. So I think in terms of sort of wide scale user adoption, we're still several years away from that. And as some people know, I mean, from a spectrum point of view, there are two quite different models. So one is using the existing MNO spectrum, and therefore you can literally potentially use the same device that you would use for a mobile call. It would just happen to connect from the sky. So for the long term, for adoption, that's probably a better model because it's the same devices people already have. And then there's another set of models which are more using satellite spectrum in L-band and S-band. And that typically means that the device would need to be modified in some way. And that probably means it's going to be a more expensive device. So if you look at what Apple has done with the iPhone Pro 14, effectively there's an extra chip that's put in the phone. And so it's a very expensive device. So I think those latter sets of models are interesting, but they're probably a a long way off from contributing to the 2.5 billion people who are primarily in Africa and Asia Pacific. So I think for the foreseeable future, it feels to me direct-to-device more like a value-added service in developing markets rather than a bringing connectivity to the unconnected service.
Thank you. Maybe Isabel, do you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely one of the very exciting innovations that we are seeing. Again, when we meet with regulators and policymakers, there is really high hope about how direct to device is going to connect their country, or at least increase digital access. I think two things. One is the handset, direct to handset, but also direct to device. We need to think in terms of IoT as well, and other services, because oftentimes enterprises or young entrepreneur or enterprises or factories in remote areas where you don't have terrestrial access. I think looking at the satellite, is really going to bring opportunities with the direct to device in areas, and enterprises that otherwise wouldn't have these opportunities. So it's not just the user, if you want, the individual user, but it's also what it can bring, more from a sort of B2B, if you want, business point of view. From our side, I think, there are a few things, and we did a sort of report recently looking at the different models. Again, it's really important to have the right framework to put all this in place. So we really need, I repeat, like a really flexible regulatory framework that enables competition. I think Toby mentioned 2 different models. Time will tell, right? You will find both models may find a way or not. And the other thing is that we really need a globally harmonized spectrum, if we want this to be a success, and spectrum certainty. But so you need really transparent and licensing regimes that are going to support that. And the other thing is what you mentioned is really to foster global and open standards. And we've seen in particular, of course, the non-terrestrial integration as an immense role to play here, and that's something we are seeing now. As you said, 3GPP in the release 17, so you had satellite integrated into 5G, but now as we look at already the next step, which is what is called in jargon release 18, it's really looking at how satellite is going to be integrated into 6G from the onset. So it's not going to be an add-on as happened with 5G, which happened many years later. We are now sitting at the table with standards body and vendors and mobile operators, really looking at how can satellite be the integral part of the development of 6G as well. And I think that is really important. And then effectively, I think every product, every service, it's the price coming down is when you sort of hit critical mass. When it becomes a mass market, that's when really you find the solution, when cost is starting to go down, and when users really understand what is called the killer app as well. Because I don't think for a user it doesn't matter whether they're connected by satellite or by mobile. Probably even when you put that Apple handset in their hands, they don't have a clue when they switch from satellite to mobile, and they don't care. Quite frankly, I wouldn't care as long as I have coverage. But if you can start providing coverage, ubiquitous coverage and everywhere, I think that would be really the killer app for the direct to device.
Dimitri, if you let me add something, beyond of these regulatory standardization and spectrum challenges, for the topic that we are discussing today, because there are, of course, a lot of interesting use cases for direct-to-device services. For the topic we are talking today about reduce the digital divide, I think it will depend on 2 main issues that we have discussed during all the hour. The first is the cost. So we know particularly what are the challenges of these regions where there is not connectivity right now. So we need to understand what is the cost and the prices of these direct-to-device services, and the performance, of course. So if we are talking about IoT will be very interesting for certain use cases, but not for connecting users in the rural population in Peru or Mexico. So for me, the challenge is what are the performances and the costs. If this could be a real tool that we can use to connect and connect it in these areas.
Great, thank you. Do you want to comment as well on this topic, Alex, or anything else to add? As we're approaching the end of the hour, maybe any last comments on today's discussion? Anything we missed maybe that's important before we close the session?
Again, I'll jump in to conclude. I always say, I only joined this industry 10 months ago, and I couldn't be more excited about it, because I think I really joined at a time where it's everywhere, the innovation that we are seeing, the growth, the enthusiasm of people. I go to dinners on Saturday with friends who talk about space this, space that, and I'm like, oh, since when, are you interested in space? So like we're really seeing there is really a momentum. And I think it's our opportunity as an industry, the satellite, to grasp that momentum and really show what this industry can really deliver. In particular, again, as we said, not only, but in areas which are not covered by any other technology, but much beyond that. And I think that's something we're going to see with new constellations, with high throughput of geos that are already in place, and direct to device and other services. So super exciting times ahead. And I'm sure we will come to this WRC in 27 with a market that will look very, very different as well, and so very interesting.
Definitely interesting times for the industry, for sure. So any last comments? Anyone else?
So Isabel, the satellite industry was satisfied with WRC outcomes?
Overall, I think, overall it's a good outcome for us. There are some little areas where not, and even within the satellite industry, some may be more satisfied than others. But overall, I think it was a good outcome.
Great. So this brings us to the end of our discussion today. So to let you know as well, the questions we did not manage to answer during the live program today, there are a few, will be responded in writing and posted next to the video on the GSOA website if they are relevant to today's topic. And so you can watch the recording of this and previous webinars at the YouTube channel and GSOA's website, so gsosatellite.com. And we're continuing our webinar series in the new year, so in 2024. I would like to thank today's panelists for sharing their very interesting views. Thank you to all of you. The audience as well for all the questions, making it very engaging for us. And so enjoy the rest of the day wherever you may be. Thank you.